Hello and welcome to Outdoors in Scotland. I'm John Burns and this is my little podcast for people who enjoy the outdoors in Scotland and pretty well anywhere else, to be quite honest. One of the changes that I've noticed in recent years is the trend towards rewilding, a growing appreciation really of the outdoor environment and what influence we can have on it. I'd like to think that we're at a sort of turning point at the moment. Things seem to be moving very differently than they were certainly 20 years ago. My guest today is the Scottish Rewilding Alliance convener and chief executive for Trees for Life. So this is the guy to talk to about rewilding, I reckon, Steve Micklewright. So I'd just like to welcome Steve to the show. How are you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, John. Yeah, not too bad at all today, thanks.
Great, great. This is a huge subject, but perhaps you could just tell me in a sort of a nutshell, really, what the Scottish Rewilding Alliance is and how it sort of came about.
Yeah, we set up the Scottish Rewilding Alliance in about 2018, formally set it up in 2019. So we've been going sort of 8 years now. The idea was to bring together all of the organisations and people that work on rewilding in Scotland and try to work together to make it easier for us to make rewilding happen. So that's resulted in quite a lot of lobbying and advocacy work towards the Scottish Government in particular to help get rewilding moving along. Because one of the assessments that we have done is if rewilding continues at the pace that it's currently going at, it'll take us about 75 years to get sort of about 30% of Scotland rewilded. And we think that's too slow. So we need it to speed up so that nature can recover, and that will help us with our, well-being and our future as humans as well.
Yeah, because I think rewilding is not just about what happens in the outdoors; it's about how we relate to wild places. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, rewilding is basically about working with nature instead of against it. So understanding how nature can help us and how we can sort of support nature to do all the things that we seem to want to invest big technology in. So trees and peatlands are great at absorbing carbon, but it feels like people want to use big tech to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. Well, trees will do that for you. So why don't we work with the trees? Why don't we work with the peatlands to get the carbon out of the atmosphere and deal with the climate crisis rather than spend millions and billions of pounds and dollars and Lord knows what else on tech that isn't unproven? That seems to be what humans like to do. But the real answer, I think, is working with nature.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And one of the major successes I think there's been of Rewind, just to pick one topic at random, really, but one thing that made a massive impression on me was the reintroduction of the beaver, which I think is really progressed at quite a rate, really. Not that long ago, I was able to go to an area where there were beavers and actually touch a tree, touch a beaver's teeth marks in a tree. And that's something my father couldn't do, my grandfather couldn't do. But they've been extinct for 400 years. So it's a wonderful thing. And recently, I understand they were reintroduced to Glen Affric. How is that project going? What do you think about the development of the rewilding of beavers sort of generally?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see rapid progress now. So it was it was gridlocked for a while. We had beavers on the Tay who had either been illegally released or escaped from somewhere. And we had a trial of beavers at Knapdale, wasn't it? And then when the government changed a while ago and there was an alliance between the Greens and the SNP, they made a decision that beavers, instead of being shot where they're causing problems on Tayside, they could be moved to new areas. So they've been reintroduced into the Cairngorms National Park, for example. That's been very successful. And we introduced them into Glen Affric, that most beautiful of glens with its amazing pine woods, just last autumn, and there are now 3 families of beavers there, and we think that they have had kits, they have had young beavers, some of them this year as well. We're waiting for the camera footage to prove that, but it's been a huge success in terms of dealing with the problem on Tayside in a more humane way, and getting beavers to where they can do great work. So you might think that beavers destroy trees because they build dams and they build their dens with them as well, their lodges with them. But actually, they actually help woodlands to thrive, because the trees that are against the edge of the lochs and the burns in which you find that beavers are usually pre-adapted to beavers. So if you chop an aspen down or a hazel down, it regrows, or a willow. So they help with that sort of natural woodland management in a way. But also the great thing about beavers is they build these dams, and they actually help to reduce flooding at no
Hmm.
cost to us. So there's been a case in London, I think it was, where beavers have done some great work, and they think that's helped them to reduce the flood risk in parts of London. It costs nothing compared again to the tech solution, which is millions of pounds of flood defences and things like that. If we can work with the natural processes that beavers bring, we can do what we need to do to try to reduce the risk of flood at less cost. So they're great for beavers, are great for the environment and for nature, but they are great for humans. They're great for us as well. And that for me is what rewilding is all about. It isn't just about the nature coming back, it's about the human benefit as well.
Absolutely. And it makes, I sort of realize that the landscape that we live in right now and the rivers that we see are mostly rivers without beavers, if that makes sense.
Yes,
I think
yes.
our landscape would look very different if we'd had beavers here for the last 400 years. Is that right?
Yeah, it would. I mean, we would have what I would call more natural riverbanks. So you would have trees that are well adapted to growing on riverbanks where beavers are, but also you'd have many, many more wetland areas because the beavers build these dams. They hold back the water and create a wetland, which is one of the best sort of environments for wildlife that you can find. And there is some evidence that that can help with salmon spawning and all the
Yeah.
sorts of things
Yeah.
that reinvigorate a depleted environment. So if beavers had been here for 400 years, our landscape would be very different. And the interesting thing about beavers is that they're mostly benign. They occasionally cause problems for farmers, but not that often. And you even find them, for example, in Vienna. You walk on the Danube in Vienna, you can look over and you can see beavers. So they're pretty benign most of the time. And when they aren't benign, when they are causing a problem for farmers, for example, it's fairly straightforward to deal with them. So that of all the animals that could be reintroduced, beavers, I think, can bring the most benefit. And also, when they cause a problem, it's relatively easy to deal with them.
Yeah, it really is fantastic that that we've actually achieved that. It feels like a huge achievement, to be fair. And I think it will make a massive difference in developing sort of increasing biodiversity in these areas and creating wetlands, as you say. I was only remembering I spoke to David Hetherington, sort of changing the subject a
Mhm.
bit. It must be about 10 years ago now, when he produced his book, The Lynx and Us. So I've been sort of fascinated by sort of the idea of lynx ever since. In fact, I actually wrote a novel, Skydance, which was about two hill walkers who pinched a pair of lynx from a wildlife park and released them. And this is art becomes true after a while. Or I'm not sure my novel was art, but when not that long ago, a couple of years ago now, I suppose,
Yeah.
two lynx actually were released. But I don't think that was a serious attempt to reintroduce links. Where are we with the reintroduction of links? Because there's been a massive, very rapid, really change as we talked about with beaver. But what about links? Because that seems to be much more difficult to progress.
Yeah, well, the thing about lynx is they're a top predator, so that they are at the same level as wolves and bears in the ecosystem, and reintroducing a top predator that will take sheep. We know that they do
Yes.
take sheep in Europe is a much bigger ask and a much bigger job to do. So what we have been doing, and we're Trees for Life, the charity I'm the CEO of, is part of a partnership
Yeah.
involving
Yeah.
Scotland Big Picture and Lifescape, and together for many years now we've been working on the process to work out whether links can come back, and if they come back, that any problems that they might cause, particularly for sheep farmers, could be managed properly, which is what happens in Europe. So what we've been doing basically since 2020 really is we have been talking a lot with different people. So we did a whole thing actually during COVID, during lockdown and everything, where we were talking to communities, talking to different stakeholders to understand what they felt about the idea of links. And it was more complicated than you might think. You might think that people are just for or against it, but what we found was there are lots of people in the middle that sort of, I quite like the idea of links coming back, was one viewpoint, but I'm not sure if now's the right time,
Right.
or I'm kind of want to know more about the evidence of what they will do when they're in the landscape for me to be convinced that it's worth them coming back. That
Hmm.
was the first stage. So it led us to believe that there was appetite to talk about this some more. And then we had another process which we called the National Links discussion, where we brought in, 50 people, I think, in all, who met, not all of us met all the time, but there were 50 hours worth of meetings. And we just discussed all of the potential issues, concerns, problems that might arise if lynx came back to Scotland. And then we worked out what we would have to do to deal with those problems. And right now, what we're doing is we're taking that out locally and asking local people in the areas where we think lynx would be released, which is essentially Highlands and Moray, what they think about the idea and what they think about the proposals to try and manage any problems if and when they occur. And that long process might eventually lead to a formal license application to reintroduce them to Scotland. But it's a long journey. It's a top predator. So people are rightfully concerned because we haven't had a top predator in Scotland since the last wolf died, I think, in the 1730s. Yes. So it's a big decision. So we're prepared to take our time and work very closely, particularly with farmers who feel they have a lot to lose here. So we have to make sure that if lynx come back, that lynx and humans, and especially farmers, can coexist with them, that there isn't more conflict over nature returning, which is what often happens.
What do you think would be the benefits of lynx returning? Because I'm sure that, as you say, they will predate on sheep, there's no doubt about that, and that will have some, effects on agriculture. But in terms of the environment, are there going to be benefits to that?
Yes, for sure. Lynx are a secretive woodland dwelling animal. Their favourite food, their favourite prey is roe deer. And we know, I live in the forest near Fochabers in Moray, and there are lots of roe deer here. I see them regularly. They're they're beautiful animals. I love seeing them. But I also know that high densities of roe deer and other deer stop the forest from regenerating. So what we do in Scotland is we try to manage deer numbers, get them down to a level where the deer can be healthy and thrive, but also they're at a lower level so the forest can naturally regenerate and trees can get away. Well, lynx can do some of that for us, particularly for the more difficult animals to stalk, like roe deer, like sika deer that live in dense forests. They'll get there. Hopefully they can get to the deer that the stalkers can't get to. They're not a silver bullet. They won't solve the very high levels of deer that we have in Scotland. That requires, professional human stalkers, but lynx could help with that. And they would help to restore a natural balance as well. So they occasionally prey on animals like foxes, which we know cause problems for ground nesting birds, but also their very presence can create a sense of fear among the sort of middle predators like foxes, which again should benefit those ground nesting birds like curlew, like capercaillie, those sorts of animals as well, particularly kappa. That's the evidence from Europe, but Scotland, it's always going to be slightly different because everywhere is slightly different. But the evidence from Europe is that they are beneficial for biodiversity. Also, generally speaking, the sheep issue, which is definitely there, can be managed. And in most European countries, then there's not a significant problem with lynx taking sheep. The problems that you find is in places like Norway, where sheep routinely roam the woodland environments there, and that's where the lynx are. So deer predation in Norway is higher, partly because the sheep run in the woods, which doesn't happen so much in Scotland.
Right. I mean, my understanding, if I'm reading David's book, is that lynx really don't like to leave the woods very much at all. And they'll only predate on sheep that are grazing very close to the woods. Is that kind of, am I right in that?
Yeah, there seem to be hotspots. So in places like Switzerland, you occasionally find a lynx that will take sheep, and it seems to be like there's a hotspot for it.
Right.
So the woodland and the sheep are close together, so the lynx can kind of nip out and take a sheep and then might get a taste for it, if you know what I mean. In those cases, John, what happens is that the project in Switzerland tries to deal with the problem with fencing or noise deterrence. Sometimes they even use guardian dogs, and then if that doesn't work, they will try and deal with the lynx. And unfortunately, sometimes that means they actually take it out of the system. They shoot it. It's sort of rogue behaviour. That's a sensible and regrettable thing that you have to do sometimes if you're trying to get this coexistence between people and predators.
Oh, that's right. I mean, I think going back to beavers briefly, I've been trying to see beavers for a while. I mean, I've not managed it. I've heard them and I've seen evidence of them about, but lynx, I think it would be if we release lynx, you would virtually never see them.
That's absolutely it. So again, I was looking at some tracking data from Switzerland actually quite a while ago now, and it basically showed that there was a lynx in one of the big parks in Basel in Switzerland. Basel's well connected to the sort of forest environment in which they live, and it was essentially in a large wooded area of parkland, and it was there for quite a long time. There were joggers running by it, there were people having picnics and kids playing, and nobody knew that the lynx was there.
Yeah,
And that's what
yeah,
it would be like if they
yes.
were to come back to Scotland. They could be in the forest where I live, in the middle of the forest here. It would be very unlikely if I ever saw them because they are so secretive and they have learnt that humans are not their friends. So
Yeah,
they avoid people
bad news.
because they know that humans aren't their friends or haven't been their friends for a long time.
Right, okay. Perhaps we go back to the sort of general picture. I mean, I kind of started this, well, my sort of remark at the start of the show really was I was saying that I felt things are changing. I've been wandering the hills in Scotland for far too long, really. And when I started walking the hills in Scotland, it felt like the huge sporting estates had made their mark on the landscape and were there forever. They weren't going to move. And there was certainly some antipathy even to people walking on the hills. Yeah, I'm going back a long way now. It feels to me different now. It feels to me as if there is a change in attitude from landowners, a change in, I guess, what folk feel about the landscape and what is possible. Do you think things are changing right now? Is this a pivotal moment?
I think things are changing, John. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think the thing to remember is when you first come to Scotland, you see these beautiful purple moorlandy big mountains,
Yeah.
and you think that's natural. You think that's how
Yes.
Scotland should be, and it is beautiful, but it's like a beautiful desert in terms of nature. It is
Absolutely.
really nature depleted, and what the landscape would like to be, if natural processes were allowed to kind of happen in Scotland, it would be much more of a mosaic of woodland and peatland and high grasslands and alpine meadow type things and more free flowing rivers. So you'd have a much more natural landscape or a landscape as nature would intend. And with
Yes.
that would come more biodiversity. So you wouldn't see an end to those beautiful purple mountains that you see, but you would see much more of a mosaic. And that's where it's starting to go because a lot of organizations and private landowners are seeing that the estate model that we have, which is around generally deer stalking or
Yes.
grouse shooting, is not particularly economically viable these days. So many estates are seeking to diversify their estate to increase their income. And some of that can involve rewilding or nature restoration as well. So there's both a kind of an economic push for it, but there's also this sense that people have realized that it is not a natural environment really. And in order to have the amount of nature around us that most people would like, requires change. And I can see that change happening, in the time I've been in Scotland. More and more and more estates and landowners are moving towards nature restoration or rewilding. And I think that's a good thing. I think you can have both. You can still have sport shooting and you can have rewilding too. I mean, in other countries, you can have and again, thinking of Norway, where hunting is very much part of the culture, they are able to see a restored forest in Norway with all the sport shooting as well. So it's not an either or. I think that's so important. It's not an either or. You can have both.
Yeah, and I went through exactly the process that you're describing, actually. And then when I first came here, I thought this was a natural landscape. And it was only later as I began to discover that the landscape has been radically changed by man. I think one of the problems is that once you realize that, once you see those scars on the landscape, it's really hard to unsee them, you
Yes.
know. But things are changing, and one of the things that is happening at the moment that I wanted to ask you about is a thing called the Rewilding Nation Charter. What
Yeah.
is that? And can you tell me why is that so important?
Okay, so the idea of the Rewilding Nation and the Rewilding Nation Charter is to get this commitment from government to support rewilding in Scotland. So as the Rewilding Alliance, we talked about very early on, if we were going to see the sort of level of nature recovery that we think we need, Scotland needs to become what we call a rewilding nation, a country that works with nature instead of against it. And that includes, things like 30% of our land and sea being rewilded, being restored for nature. So the charter is all about what that looks like in practice. So how do we restore nature? How do we restore our seas? And what do we need to do? And committing to that as both an individual, but also as an indicator to government that there is really strong support for rewilding. We know that more than 70+% of Scots support rewilding, would like to see it happen, would like to see more of it. It's our way of trying to show to the government that there is general buy-in to this concept, and they need to get behind it, because the government itself has got targets around nature restoration now, which are now legal targets. To get there, we think that means more beavers, that means probably reintroducing lynx, it means more forest recovery, more peatland restoration, and more seas that are a bit more free of fishing so that they can recover, so you get more fish in the longer term. So those are the changes that are needed, and that's what we call the Rewilding Nation.
And so is there something that listeners or that listen to our podcast or we can do as individuals? I mean, is there anything that we can contribute towards this?
Yeah, the best thing I would suggest people do is go and look at the rewild.scot website, which is the Rewilding Alliance's website, and sign up for updates. And then when we're doing an action around, usually in trying to influence government or something, you'll get an alert and be asked if you've got the time and you're interested to send an email to government or to your MSP. That's a huge help for us. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think the charter is still live. So I think you can still sign the charter as well if you want to show that you're committed to that, and make a statement as to why you think rewilding should happen, why we need more nature restoration, not less. So, but I would say the first thing is sign up to the rewild.scot. Have a look at the rewild.scot website and then sign up for updates. And then the team behind the Rewilding Alliance will ask you to get involved when we need some support.
Right. So it's really a way of bringing people together to actually influence change. Is that really what this is about?
Yes, very much so. And another thing that's worth looking at, we did this film a while ago called Why Not Scotland?
Yes.
So if you look on YouTube, I think it's live on YouTube now. You can watch that. It's about an hour long, and it literally takes you on a journey essentially around Europe, and looking at what's happening in Europe in terms of rewilding, and asking the question, why not Scotland? Why is it such a big deal for us in Scotland to do some of this, when if you look over at the other side of the North Sea, you can see it happening in quite a widespread and quite a dramatic way now. So Scotland's doing a fair amount, but it could do so much more if it embraced the idea of rewilding.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'll put links to that video and the charter on the page for this podcast if people want to go and take a look at that. I think for me, one of the questions is, I don't know, as far as the landscape is concerned, what is Scotland if it isn't the landscape? That we kind of need a vision for where our future could be.
I think that's right. I think in terms of our land and our sea as well, is what is our vision for that? What do we want from it? And I think what we want is nature thriving. We want to see it doing its bit for the climate and making sure that Scotland does its bit for climate change. But also we want to see people as an intrinsic part of the land and the landscape, and that means nature-based jobs, but it also means a sense of getting out into nature and experiencing it and enjoying it. And I think it's not just, if we continue down the path that we're going on in kind of geological time and humans eventually disappear, nature will recover in geological time. So this is, for me, rewilding is just as much about human survival as it is about nature survival. And we need that nature, we need that wilder landscape, because it provides all the life support systems that we depend on. And we are so good at ignoring. I mean, you just look at some of the politicians now and denying that the climate change is real and all the rest of it. We're very good at denial, humans, but it's staring us in the face. We're in the middle of this huge nature climate crisis or emergency, or whatever you want to call it. But it's not just a nature and climate crisis, it's a human crisis as well. And once we realise that restoring the land and restoring our seas ensures our survival, I think that's the point at which we start to see rapid change. But, John, as you know, there are really strong forces against that, because it's not in everybody's interest for that to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the things that you often feel sort of overwhelmed by these things, but I think even as individuals, we make small changes and those changes begin to combine to make a big change. So there are things that we can do. For example, I dug a pond in my back garden, and
Okay.
got my garden's now full of little frogs. That's
Yeah.
I think that's a
Yes.
bit of a start, you know.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, again, I'm fortunate to have a large garden up here in Murray, and a large area now is not cut in the summer. We cut it through a hay cut in the autumn. What we now see are many, many, many more moths in our garden than we saw before we introduced the hay meadow. Um,
Right, right,
we
okay.
have we have a large pond, and what happens is that we see a lot of frogs and toads and newts, and we also
Yeah,
see ducks coming and landing on it, which is a bit worrying sometimes. But
yeah,
the heron comes and takes a few fish that are in there, but it all feels like it's in a natural balance. It all feels
yeah.
that's the way nature intended it to be. People used to scare and still do scare away herons from their ponds, I suppose, especially if they've got really valuable fish. We don't. We let the herons come, and we still have frogs and toads and fish
Hmm.
in there. So there's a natural balance, and I think if you allow it to, nature will find it, I think.
I think that's right. Well, Steve Micklewright, thank you very much for talking to me. I think your comment there about the landscape as nature intended it to be, I think is a really important statement. And I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I really hope you have success in the future. And I encourage everyone to sign the Rewilding Nation Charter. You are making a difference. We are making a difference. Things are changing. So thank you very much for talking to me.
Yeah, no worries, John. It's been really nice to chat.
And thanks very much to Steve Micklewright from the Scottish Rewilding Alliance for talking about the really important work that they do and some of the really great things they've achieved. The more I wander Scotland's hills and explore our wild places, the more it makes me realise that the landscape is not just a background to our adventures and our lives. We are of the land, we come from the land, and it's really a part of us. And I think that's a really important reason to bring back the creatures and to bring back the environment as it should be, not the devastated, wrecked place that we've left. And it's very important that generations to come have an environment that's worth having, really, isn't it? So I do hope that if you've enjoyed the show, that you'll take a moment to sign the Rewilding Nation Charter. I've put a link to that on the podcast webpage, so you can add your voice. And every little voice, every little change you make, I think makes a difference. All the a lot of little changes end up as one big one. Thanks very much for listening. I do hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you very much.